Brian Barnett is just a regular guy. He's not a doctor. He has no legal license in any field of mental or emotional health. Brian Barnett merely shares the insights he's gained from his personal experiences for anybody who may choose to use such information as he or she personally chooses, while accepting full responsibility for his or her own individual thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and actions. Brian Barnett assumes no responsibility whatsoever for anybody's individual choice to expose himself or herself to any information that Brian Barnett shares, and by listening to this program, you're acknowledging that you, and only you, are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to The Last Symptom. I'm Brian Barnett, the creator and the host of The Last Symptom. I was just watching my dog back here on the video that I'm making as I'm recording this show here, and watching him trying to get comfy on his on my chair, actually. And ain't it interesting how long it takes them to get comfortable? It just cracks me up. Well, he's comfortable. I'm comfortable. I hope you all are comfortable as well. And I'm happy to have you here back with me on the Last Symptom podcast. Got a few things interesting things to talk to you about today. I gotta be honest, I didn't have a really coherent show put together this week, just because, so close to the holidays and everything. I've just had my hands unusually full. So some of you might have thought that perhaps I'd forgotten about you this week, but I did not. And it is technically Friday or Thursday for me. So I am truly recording this on Thursday night. Most of y'all will probably hear it on Friday, especially you folks down under. But even those of you here in the United States with me, probably going to hear this on Friday. That's all right. Before we get into today's show, let me tell you about thelastsymptom.com. Of course, that's my website full of free resources, and there are some paid resources there too. Paid resources are what go a real long way in allowing me to continue doing this work. That, along with donations. Donations continue to be particularly helpful for me, and always a pleasant surprise when one comes through. So I want to thank you for obvious reasons, because of the topics that I discuss here. I can't give shout outs and name people and stuff like that, but you know who you are, and I just want to thank you, and I want to thank anybody who's considering it. The paid services that I offer: one-on-one phone conversations with me, one-on-one Zoom video conversations with me, and also the Last Symptom Fundamentals course, which is a 2-week intensive pre-recorded video course. If you've ever seen somebody take a pre-recorded college course online or anything like that, it's of that nature, so it's nothing too scary. I do want to say that because people in my community, often the holidays are very difficult for them in emotional ways, that I will be available throughout the holidays to talk to people, both one-on-one and also on my education group, which is located on Locals. And if you're interested in joining that, it's I don't know why I keep forgetting to include the dot, www.thelastsymptom.locals, LOCALS.com. We'd love to have you over there. To get us started today, I wanted to tell you about beautiful Gem Key, spelled just like it sounds. Beautiful Gem, Jim, Key, Key. What do you reckon I'm talking about? Well, beautiful Gem Key was a horse. That's right, he was a famous horse around the turn of the century. And I got this information here off Wikipedia. I don't remember where I come across the reference to beautiful Gem Key in the first place, but I just drew my attention. Love that name. And I did some more research on this horse, and here's what I found. I thought I'd share it with you. He was, as I say, a famous horse, a performing horse. His promoters claimed that Beautiful Jim Key could read and write, make change with money, do arithmetic for numbers below 30, and cite Bible passages, but not just any Bible passages. Bible passages where horses were mentioned, or where Bible passages where horses, there was a focus on the horse, and the horse doing something particularly interesting or righteous. His trainer, doctor, which is in quotes, so probably wasn't a real doctor. Well, let's say that a traditionally trained and educated doctor, William Key, was a former slave, a self-trained veterinarian, and a patent medicine salesman. There's some interesting things about this Mr. William Key, this former slave and self-trained veterinarian. The most interesting thing that stood out to me was that he used only patience and kindness in teaching beautiful Jim Key the horse, and he never used a whip, which was probably unusual for that time as far as trainers go. The horse performed at large venues from Atlantic City to Chicago. Jim Key was supposedly intelligent enough that he could calculate mathematical problems, possibly even trigonometry. I'm not so sure that I buy into that, but I'm sure they had a trick down that made it appear so. The president at the time, William McKinley, got to see beautiful Jim Key perform at an exposition in Tennessee, and when he did, he commented that it was an example of what kindness and patience could accomplish. If you'd be interested in learning more about beautiful Jim Key, the way you spell it is J-I-M, first name, last name K-E-Y. I guess the first name is beautiful, so just beautiful like it's spelled, and then Jim Key. Very interesting. I love pulling out real stories from the past like that and becoming acquainted with them out of nowhere. We live in a world, that's it's always fascinated by the new and what's coming in the future and all that. It's like movies, right? That I love movies, especially during the pandemic. The heart of the pandemic, when everything was shut down, Hollywood was shut down and all that. And so there were a lot of new movies coming out of very high quality and in the numbers that we were typically used to. One thing that I thought was wonderful was being able to go back in time, back into the vault of all the movies that were made all the way back into the early 1900s and stuff like that. And man, I made some wonderful discoveries back there. And so I just feel like, there is an advantage to being born now and living now, is that not only are we seeing these wonderful things, these futuristic things come into play, but we have this vast library of media from the past that we can go to and learn about fresh, just like as if it were released today or created today, even though it was created 100 years ago. It's new to us. Books like that, music like that, music especially. If you're only listening to today's songs, you're missing out. You really need to broaden out, turn to the past, and see how the past has influenced all of today's music. It's pretty amazing. From the Epoch Times, an article about the health benefits of being grateful. I bookmarked this weeks ago. Let's see, it was published on December 4th. So I come across it, I think, on December 4th. I bookmarked it, printed it off, thought I'd like to share this with my audience, and so the day has come. And there are things I had to correct within this article, for my audience as I was going through it, but it's still a lot of value to it. The profound health benefits of being grateful. This was written by Joseph Mercola from the Epic Times. Gratitude is a simple practice that can have profound effects on your health and well-being. You're going to be amazed at just how true that is, according to this article. Positive effects linked to gratitude include social, psychological, and physical benefits, which increase the more you make gratitude a regular part of your daily routine. The limits to gratitude's health benefits are really in how much you pay attention to feeling and practicing gratitude, said neuroscientist Glenn Fox. He's a gratitude expert. Did you know that there was such a thing? Well, apparently there is. A gratitude expert at the University of Southern California. Boy, how do you get that job? Becoming a gratitude expert. Well, probably the same way you get to be a borderline personality disorder authentic recovery expert. One thing I want to correct here. So the article says this neuroscientist named Glenn Fox, in his statement there, he says it's related to how much you pay attention to feeling and practicing gratitude. Now, here at The Last Symptom, we've all learned, and we know very well, that you cannot control your feelings, right? So you can't just choose to feel gratitude, right? You can't just choose to like click a switch and feel gratitude about things. But what he's really talking about here, which, I don't want to beat up on the guy or anything, but the nuances of language for my audience especially, and definitely the general audience, matter. And the nuance here is that what he's really talking about is thinking in grateful ways, right? So you can't just choose to feel gratitude, but you can choose to think in grateful ways, right? And think about grateful things. And of course, that will have a direct result on how you begin to feel. So there's no just, okay, I'm going to practice feeling gratitude. You can't do that. It's at the very foundation of what we talk about here. You can't control what you feel or how you feel. And if you're not feeling gratitude, it's not like you're doing something wrong. So, but we are talking about thinking in grateful ways. You do have full control over what you continue thinking about and how you continue thinking about things. So that is within your power. Glenn Fox, this neuroscientist, goes on to say, it's very similar to working out in that the more you practice, the better you get. The more you practice, the easier it is to feel grateful when you need it. Well, again, he's talking about thinking gratefully, not just turning on some switch and boom, now I'm feeling grateful. No, the way you do that is you choose how to think, what you're going to think about, and then how you're going to think about it. So you think about things in a grateful way. And the more you see the reasons you have to be grateful, then you really will start to feel grateful. Remember, every feeling is preceded by a thought. So even though we don't have the power to control what we feel, we do have the power to control the thoughts that give birth to the things we feel. How gratitude changes your brain. It says gratitude has distinct neurobiological effects included in brain regions associated with interpersonal bonding and stress relief. The neuroscientist Glenn Fox grew deeply interested in gratitude, get this, after his mother's death from ovarian cancer. This is very interesting. I wanted to share this with you because a lot of folks in my audience have either experienced some real tragedy and some really bleak times, or are currently experiencing real gloom in their life. And it was interesting to me that this neuroscientist Glenn Fox, he became interested in gratitude out of a tragedy. Isn't that interesting? What did I say we have control over? What we think about and how we choose to think about a thing. And it seems to me that from this tragedy, he went in an interesting direction, didn't he, with his thoughts and focus. During his mom's illness, he would send her studies on the benefits of gratitude in cancer patients. And she kept a gratitude journal in her final years. Is that something that's missing from your life? A gratitude journal? Writing is very important for me in my personal life. It's also obviously very important to my work here with The Last Symptom. But this, so it's something I recommend to people, but this kind of fine-tunes it even more, doesn't it? You're not just writing about anything. You're keeping a journal where you're writing about things that you are thinking gratefully about. A gratitude journal. I'd never heard of such a thing when I read this, but I liked it. I liked it when I come across it. In one example, 92 adults with advanced cancer engaged in mindful gratitude journaling or routine journaling. So two different types of journaling. After 7 days, those who kept gratitude journals had significant improvements in measures of anxiety, depression, and spiritual well-being. So much so that the researchers concluded that mindful gratitude journaling could positively affect the state of suffering, psychological distress, and quality of life with patients with advanced cancer. So, again, maybe something that's just right down your alley, Give it some thought. Grateful people, the article goes ahead to say, tend to recover faster from trauma and injury. We're talking about physical trauma and injury. Grateful people tend to recover faster. Why are they more grateful? They choose to think about in grateful ways. Fox told The Pulse, they tend to have better and closer personal relationships and may even just have improved health overall. As it turns out, putting your gratitude in words can be an effective way to improve your health. Among 293 adults who sought psychotherapy services, those who engaged in gratitude writing reported significantly better emotional health after 4 and 12 weeks than those who didn't write or who just wrote about their thoughts and feelings. Interesting. Fox also explained that benefits associated with gratitude include, get this list of things. Better sleep. You having trouble sleeping? Maybe you need to keep a gratitude journal. More exercise. You having trouble being motivated to exercise? Maybe you need to keep a gratitude journal. Reduce symptoms of physical pain. Lower levels of inflammation. Lower blood pressure, and a host of other things we associate with better health, including improved resilience. It's likely that gratitude leads to benefits via multiple mechanisms, not only by improving life satisfaction, but also by contributing to an increase in healthy activities and a willingness to seek help for health problems. Those who are grateful have even been found to have a better sense of the meaning of life by being able to perceive good family function and peer relationships. Let's see here. It says gratitude is known to facilitate improvements in healthy eating. Boy, maybe I need to keep a gratitude journal. And it benefits depression by enhancing self-esteem and well-being. Feeling grateful can help you sleep better and longer, perhaps by improving your thoughts prior to sleep. That's what they get wrong there. Let's read that again. Feeling grateful can help you sleep better and longer, perhaps by improving your thoughts prior to sleep. Don't they have that backwards, don't they? They've got that totally backwards. What precedes our feelings? What precedes everything we feel? Our thoughts. They're saying, feel first, and then that'll improve your thoughts. That ain't the way it works. But like I said, otherwise there's a lot of good in this article. The way it works is you choose what and how you're going to think. And you choose to think about things you're grateful about, or you choose to think about things and look at it in ways you can be grateful for those things. You do that, then you'll feel more grateful, won't you? And then you'll sleep better. The article goes on to say people who are more grateful tend to be less materialistic and less likely to suffer from burnout. Among teenagers, the simple practice of keeping a gratitude journal significantly reduced materialism and the negative effect of materialism on generosity. Those who wrote down what they were grateful for donated 60% more of their earnings to charity, for instance. Think about that. Those who wrote down what they were grateful for donated 60% more of their earnings to charity. That's kind of incredible. That's not like 12% more, or 5% more. That's 60% more. The neuroscientist says, I think gratitude can be a lot like a muscle, like a trained response or skill that we develop over time as we've learned to recognize abundance and gifts and things that we didn't previously notice as being important, he said. And that itself is its own skill that can be practiced and manifested over time. Rather than a magic bullet, it's the regular practice of being grateful. Again, we're not talking about choosing what we feel and how we feel. What he's really talking about is it's the regular practice of thinking in grateful ways. That's the skill. Thinking in grateful ways. And the feelings of gratefulness will follow. But that's what makes the difference, according to this neuroscientist Fox. He says, it's like water cutting rock through a canyon. It ain't done all at once, and it's just steady practice is where you start to get things. Now here's 2 gratitude experiences or practices that you can try in your daily life. And according to this article. Number 1, you probably already guessed it, keeping a gratitude journal. And number 2, expressing gratitude. With a gratitude journal, here's what you do. You write down lists of what you're grateful for on a regular basis. So I reckon you could just keep it by your bed or someplace where you regularly sit down and right next to the TV remote control, perhaps. Expressing gratitude, the second part, the second recommendation, is exactly what it sounds like. You're expressing grateful things to others, such as saying thank you or writing gratitude letters. These gratitude letters, we called those greeting cards when I was a kid, which you then read to the recipients. Now they bring in this other professor. His name's Robert Emmons, and he's a professor of psychology at the University of California. In an article he wrote for Greater Good magazine, he advises that you remember hard times in your life, which remind you how much you have to be grateful for now. Boy, I'll tell you, folks, that's not hard for me when I think back to the events surrounding my big old borderline personality disorder crisis and the hard times that followed. And I do not have a hard time making that contrast. But I tell you, it works. So I underlined it in the article because it works. Something as simple as just me being able to go and put gas in my truck without fretting about whether putting gas in my trunk is going to mean I'm not going to be able to eat later in the week. Just a huge thing. I mean, these are things that I once took for granted. Then I had this terribly difficult run in my life. I don't take those things for granted no more. So that's his advice. Remember hard times in your life. That will remind you how much you have to be grateful for now. Another thing is appreciate what it means to be human by tuning into and appreciating your sense of touch, sight, smell, hearing. Use visual reminders, including people, to trigger gratitude. I reckon so for like photographs and stuff like that. You know, I've been going through some bunch of my old media and pictures and stuff like that, especially people in my past, and feel tremendous gratitude for them, of course. If you want to get started today, well, here it goes. Keep a notebook by your bedside and make a point to jot down one or two things that you're grateful for each night before bed, and express gratitude to others often, such as writing quick thank you notes to friends. So I guess that's timely, given the time of year we're in, and everybody's thinking about New Year's resolutions and being gracious to others and stuff like that. So hope you enjoyed that. Let's talk about the concept of good and bad. You know, when I was starting through my recovery, my authentic recovery from borderline personality disorder, one thing I come up against was I was thinking about, you know, all that my dad had done to me, and my mom too. You know, they were a team, and that's the way parents work. They are a team. So there's never just one. There's never one bad guy and one good guy in the parent dynamic when we're talking about abused or emotionally neglected children. Both of them were a team. But, you know, my dad's the easy target, and he's the one who did the most blatant and obvious abuses. But, you know, in my own recovery, I'd often think about him. How can I hold him accountable to these things? And what is the proper way for me to view him? Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy in these things? And then I'd look at myself and realize that I had done much of these same things. I had grown up, got my own family, and did much of these same things that he had done. Well, I didn't want to be a bad person. I wanted to be a good person. So how can I look at my father as being bad and, you know, look at myself and want to see myself as good? It seemed like a contradiction. Well, that was when I had to have a serious discussion with myself and a serious analysis with myself about what defines a good person and a bad person. And I wanted to share some of that with you today. This is not a comprehensive discussion about this. It's just a brief discussion about this, but it'll give you something to think about. And then later when we talk about it in, you know, greater detail, maybe it'll be easier for you to swallow. Here's the conclusion I come to about what determines if a person is good or bad. Very briefly, the thing that determines this is one's willingness or sincerity combined with capacity. And you and I have talked a lot about the differences between capacity and ability. When we're talking about ability, we're just talking, when we're talking about what you're able to do, that's ability. When you say, I can do this, many of you know that I'm bilingual, I speak Spanish. In Spanish, the word for can is based around ability. It's what you are able to do. On the other hand, capability and capacity is something entirely different. And I've illustrated it 19 cajillion trillion times, but I will do it again today for anybody who's new to the program. For example, an example I use, an easy one, is that I'm unable to play the trombone. I think we just talked about this last week, in fact. I'm unable to play the trombone, but I am capable of playing the trombone. What's that mean? It means that the possibility does exist within myself. If at any time I should choose to take advantage of my capacity as a person to play the trombone, I can learn and I can do it. So that might not seem so profound on the surface, but the more you think about it, the more profound it becomes. basically what it means is we can expect things of people that they are unable to do, and it's not unfair or unreasonable for us to do so. We apply that to ourselves, and we apply that to others. And that's just the way it works. We send our kids to school every year precisely so that they will do things that they're unable to do. My daughter, a year ago, she was unable to count to 100. She went to school. Now she counts to 100. Why? Because she was capable of counting to 100, even if she was unable to. When we look at ourselves in recovery, we say to ourselves, well, I cannot hold myself. I can't expect something of myself. It's not reasonable to do that, or fair, to expect something of myself that I'm literally incapable of doing. So if it is impossible to recover from borderline personality disorder, then very reasonably I can't expect myself to do that, can I? Fortunately, full, authentic, and permanent recovery from emotional disorders, which is what borderline personality disorder is not something we're incapable of. Let me say that in another way. We are capable, people are capable of recovering from emotional disorders such as borderline personality disorder. Therefore, it is reasonable and it's the only healthy expectation for us to have as individuals when we realize that we do have an emotional disorder. The only reasonable conclusion there is to expect ourselves to rid ourselves of that emotional disorder. So you can see then that this finer understanding of the differences between capacity and ability are really important, because they define for us what is reasonable and unreasonable as far as our expectations for ourselves and for others. If my daughter is incapable of learning math or of learning how to count to 100, it's not reasonable for me to send her to school and expect it from her, is it? However, if she's simply unable to count to 100, but she's capable of counting to 100, then it's totally fair and reasonable for me to send her to school and expect that from her. That's an example of us applying that to other people. Now let's apply it to ourselves. If I am unable to treat people well, if I'm unable to stop abusing the people I claim to care about, if I'm unable to stop frivolously and irresponsibly spending money, if I'm unable to you name it, stop cheating on my girlfriend, if I'm unable to do any of these things, but I'm capable of them, then it is reasonable to hold ourselves to a different set of standards, right, than if we were incapable of doing those things. This understanding of capability versus ability allows us to set very high expectations for ourselves and for others and expect them to completely live up to those expectations and know that we're being fair and reasonable at the same time. And on the other hand, it allows us to identify things that other people are simply unable to do, or that we're simply unable to do, and say, all right, well, but that's not an excuse. You still got to do it. Then on the other hand, it allows us to identify things that's totally beyond anything that we're capable of, and then we can let ourselves off the hook there, and we can let others off the hook there. Well, I think last week I gave this real exaggerated example of me dropping a marble off a boat, and because you work for me, expecting you to swim down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench just in your swim trunks, find that marble and bring it up to me, and you arguing with me. But it's impossible. It's impossible. Well, because it's impossible, I say, well, then it's not a fair expectation. I can't expect something of you fairly and reasonably. That is literally, it's beyond your capacity as a human being. Now, you're probably wondering how this all figures in to concepts of good and bad. Well, think about this. There are no perfect people anywhere on our planet. So, you and I, we're one of something like 7 billion people. And every single one of us, all 7 billion of us, are all making mistakes and falling short every day. So think about that. 7 billion people, every single one of us, doing stupid things, negatively impacting others, either intentionally or unintentionally, and falling short of being the type of person that we wish we could be. So there's context for starting out in this conversation about good and bad. So then, if this is true, what are the relevant qualifying factors for what makes people good or bad? For what qualifies a person as being good or bad? What sets one person apart from another if we're all making the same dumb mistakes and bumbling through life and trying to finally figure it all out and get it right sometime before we croak? Well, you remember what I said? What defines the difference? It's willingness or sincerity combined with capacity. Looking at my father's example and my example, when faced with these tremendously hard and painful results in my life, what was I willing to do? What was I genuinely willing to do? I was genuinely willing to look inward, honestly, and then apply what? My capacities. I was willing to hold myself, my expectations for myself according to my capacities, not according to my abilities. What has been my father's example so far? Throughout his entire life, by the way. Not just in these last 10 years, but in his entire life. Number one, never a willingness to look inward honestly. Oh, there's a willingness to look at himself, but not honestly. There's no sincerity there in his analysis of himself. And number two, what does he hold himself to? What is the limit he puts on himself for the expectations he has of himself? What he's able or not able to do. Not what his capacity is or his capabilities are, but what he is currently able or unable to do. Some intellectuals subscribe to the notion that there's no such thing as bad people. In fact, that psychologist in Arizona that I often talk about as being the guy who caused me to have these tremendous revelations and breakthroughs that I later built upon and which led to my authentic recovery. He subscribed to that notion. He believed that there were only people damaged by their environment when they were children. And he concluded that if you were to go back in a time machine and change things for them, they would turn out to be good people, and then the world would have no bad people. But that's not true. He's wrong. He did a lot for me, but he and these other intellectuals are wrong. They're ignoring some extremely relevant factors in order to arrive at such a simplified notion. For example, they fail to take into consideration free will. Free will. Some people just choose to be bad. It's by choice. Even if you want to factor my dad into this thing, every day he's choosing not to do the same work that I did. So that's free will. He doesn't have to. And by the way, I often talk about free will as the law of individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority. It's just a much more detailed explanation of what free will truly implies and and all the broader implications of it. But they're one and the same. So that's how he chooses to use his free will. I, held myself to consequences, held myself to expectations and consequences. That's the way I chose to use my free will. There are people who choose to be bad. In the past when we've talked about infidelity, and I've explained until I'm blue in the face that it's not in and of itself. It is not a reflection of emotional disorder or of emotional unhealth. Perfectly healthy people choose to have affairs. Perfectly healthy people choose to rob banks. Perfectly healthy people choose to cheat on their income tax. Perfectly healthy people choose lots of things. So totally unrelated as far as morality goes. But that's free will. It's, I get to choose. You get to choose. We all get to make these choices for ourselves, and nobody will stop us. I used to say that nobody can stop us, but that's if you're a God-fearing person, you don't believe that's true. Obviously, God could stop you. He just doesn't. He allows you to make whatever choice for yourself you want to make. So free will is one thing that these intellectuals fail to take into consideration. And what's the other one? They fail to take into consideration the principles of capacity versus ability. It's so important related to the overall balance of everything we talk about here. That's why I've been talking about it a lot lately. In short, whatever you have the capacity for, and which you should do or should cease doing, stop doing, for example, emotionally and physically abusing your children. Maybe you can't stop yourself, but that's only because you haven't gotten to the root causes of these things. You have the capacity to not be abusive to those that you claim to care about. You have that capacity. Now it's a matter of, do you have the willingness to analyze yourself in brutally honest ways and change what needs to be changed? So anytime a person should do a thing and he or she has the capacity to do a thing, but he or she chooses not to do that, then that person is choosing wrong over right, bad over good. This innate aspect of being a human being, the capacity built into us, is the relevant qualifying measure for what can reasonably be expected of you. Your capacity is an inherent part of you, which is not at all affected by what you are able or unable to do. It's not affected by anything. It's an inherent possibility that exists. So again, just another example to try to bring it home a little bit. I'm unable to speak Japanese, but I have the capacity to do it. If I make the effort and I do the work that's required, eventually I could be speaking Japanese. So one's painful childhood is not a legitimate or acceptable excuse for doing bad now as an adult, or for continuing to do bad as an adult. Ignorance, not a legitimate or acceptable excuse for doing wrong. What one is currently unable to do is not a legitimate or acceptable excuse for doing wrong. Why? Because of free will and capacity. Free will, the law of individual inherent rights, responsibility, and authority, combined with capacity. Despite all of a person's ignorance and the way they were raised and all these things, once they become an adult and they have free will, they have the choice to decide how to use that free will in combination with their capacities. So people have the choice to use their capacities to not do wrong, to educate themselves, to behave differently. And what does it all come down to? Caring. If you want to strip away everything, all the difficult stuff we talk about, that's what it comes down to. Do you care or not? Why has my father not done the same work that I have done? Because he doesn't care to. If he did care to, what would we see? If he truly cared to, we would see him doing the same work that I have had to do to be where I am now. It's really what it is, that willingness. When we talk about that willingness or that sincerity, it's just care. Do you care? Saying you care means nothing. When a person cares, what is followed by a person genuinely caring about a thing? Then there's action, right? There is effort, right? If I genuinely care about building, my daughter's been after me to build her a treehouse, and I know it's going to be a big job, so I've been putting it off. If I genuinely cared about having that treehouse built by the end of the weekend, guess what? It would be built by the end of the weekend. Don't tell her. I just don't care that much yet. But once I do, it will get built. Doing bad and being bad, it's important to recognize, are two different things. Doing bad things does not automatically, by itself, mean you are a bad person. Because remember, you're surrounded by 7 billion other people. I'm one of them. And every one of us are doing bad things. So again, just the fact that you're doing bad things does not make you a bad person. What factors separate good people from bad people? Willingness or sincerity, same thing, combined with capacity. What are you capable of doing, and are you willing to do that? A parent who abuses his children is doing a very bad thing. His ignorance and poor emotional health are not legitimate excuses for the mistreatment of his own innocent children, who he's been given a great responsibility and privilege to care for and protect. So not only is an abusive parent guilty of mistreating another human being, it would be bad enough in itself if you're just out abusing a person. But what people are we particularly talking about in these situations? We're talking about people who have specifically the responsibility of caring for and protecting their children from exactly these things. So imagine that. You're given the responsibility to protect at all costs your children from abuse and harm. And what do you do instead? You are the abuse and harm. Do you see how disgusting that is? It's kind of like an abhorrent, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it's just an abhorrent, disgusting betrayal. The very people tasked with caring for and protecting the children from these things are the ones literally doing the thing that they're supposed to be protecting them from. They're the ones causing that harm and that abuse. There's a word for it, but it's just escaping me right now. It's like totally backwards. It's a perversion, is what it is. It's like a perversion of the way things are supposed to be. A total perversion and betrayal. So, we just described this parent who's doing a very bad thing by abusing his or her children. But does this sort of wrong committed by parents automatically classify them as bad people? Is my father a bad person specifically because of what he did? No, he's a bad person because of what he's not done since. Right? That's something we're thinking about. I did the same things that my father did, but when I realized what I was doing and I suffered enough consequences, what did I do then? Well, I figured out what the root causes of it were, and I eliminated those root causes, and now I don't treat people like that. So it's not just the wrong that a person is committing that automatically classifies parents as being bad people. Committing wrong in itself is not what determines if somebody is a bad person. What determines if a person is bad or not is if he or she doesn't care, so therefore doesn't use his or her free will to be willing or sincere to use their capacity to identify what is wrong and change it. That's the defining thing. What would be required for a person to use this capacity to change? Well, the first thing we've already talked about is sincerity, willingness, genuineness. A genuine willingness to make a totally honest self-examination, to care. That's what it would require for people to really tap into and take advantage of their capacity to change. Are there sincere, disingenuous people who simply don't care? Yes, there are. That's free will. And so far, that has been my father. He hasn't been sincere. He hasn't been genuine. He hasn't been willing. And he hasn't used his capacity to identify these things and change. There are people who purposely choose to do bad and they enjoy it. There are bad people in the world. This is a lesson I try to teach my daughter all the time, because she, bless her little heart, she likes to think that everybody's just got the best motives and best intentions and everything. You and I know that's not true. And so that's where the old psychologist and I deviate as far as our conclusions on things. If I have to hold my father, if I have to consider my father as a bad person based simply on what he did as a parent, then I would be a bad person too. And I know that's not true. I'm not a bad person. But it's only not true because of how our choices have differed. He has not been willing to analyze himself in an honest, genuine, sincere way and say to himself, I really, truly want to see what is allowing me to be abusive to the people I claim to care about, identify those things and truly fix them, no matter how painful they might be to see and to look at and accept are there. On the other hand, I did that work, and it was painful, and it was humbling, and it was brutal, but I was willing to do that. Why? Because I cared. It was something I really cared about. I really cared about not wanting to be the same type of parent that my father was. And then I set my expectations not on what I was able to do or unable to do, but on what my capacity was, what I was capable of doing. So there's our conversation about good and bad. That's what distinguishes a good person from a bad person. Do they care for real? And when we're talking about do they care, we're just talking about willingness. Are they willing? And when we're talking about are they willing, we're just talking about are they sincere, genuine. And the principle of capacity versus ability. It's not what we're able to do. That's not the measurement that we hold ourselves to. That we create our expectations for ourselves and others around. Not what we're able to do, not what they're able to do. It's what are they capable of doing. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we know what is reasonable and unreasonable as far as expectations go, doesn't it? So I hope you all have enjoyed this conversation. It's very late now, Thursday night for me, and I'm going to take a couple days off, and but I'll be on the Last Symptom Locals group there, or education group there on Locals, www.thelastsymptom.locals.com. Hope to see you there. You folks have a wonderful, wonderful few days here as everybody's out on their vacations and celebrating and doing those things. You guys stay safe, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. By the way, I forgot to mention that the podcast now is now available as a video, which I make available on Rumble and YouTube. And as you can imagine, the video often appears several hours after the podcast audio appears. And that's simply because when I get done recording this thing, I have to edit the audio, and then I have to edit the video, and editing and uploading the video takes a lot longer than the audio does. So that's the story. I'm sticking to it, and I'll see you guys soon.